Russia is an energy superpower that today is freezing to death in the dark. In cities just outside of Moscow, families are filming ice forming on the inside of their apartment walls. While the Kremlin exports gas to the world, its own citizens are huddled in coats in their living rooms. This is not because of a weather disaster. It is because of a budget disaster. Every winter in Russia, pipes burst in towns like Podolsk and in Voronezh because the maintenance money is gone. The budget for replacing these pipes was slashed to pay for the war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin made a choice. He chose to buy artillery shells instead of fixing the heating grid. Today, General Frost is waging war against Russia. But these frozen pipes are just the first crack in the dam. The real flood is coming from a sudden $82 billion hole in the national wallet. And the one country that was supposed to plug that hole has just walked away. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post and a national security advisor. In Russia today, it's very cold, and it's about to get a lot colder. So let's take a look at this, what this actually means and what this means for Russia's economy, which has a direct influence, which we'll discuss, with what will happen with Russia in this war against Ukraine. But before we continue, as you know, the reason this channel exists is singular, to support Ukraine, to get out the truth of what's happening here in Kiev, Ukraine, and what's really happening inside of Russia. Because you can be very sure the Russian press, it doesn't like to talk about this. It does not talk about the total disaster that their national economy has become. It doesn't talk about the fact their national leaders have chosen to kill people in a foreign country instead of protecting their lives right now back in Russia. But you can help me get the truth to more people and help us to get this to a wider audience. The means by which you can support Ukraine are just so simple. Please like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Leave your comments below, share the video with others, and consider becoming a channel member today. And just one quick thing before we move on, I have a special thanks for all who have contributed for the Ukrainian soldiers to get life-saving drones. In fact, just this morning, we delivered more drones to the fighting men of the 93rd Brigade.
Вітаю. Ми бійці 93-ї бригади розвідроти. Стоїмо на Донецькому напрямку. Дякуємо Jason Jack Smart та European Resilience Initiative Center за підтримку в придбанні автівки. Ця допомога врятує нам не одне життя. Дякую за вашу постійну підтримку. Слава Україні!
Thank you everyone who has donated for the Ukrainian soldiers to get life-saving drones. In the first comment, which I will pin, will be a link of how you too can join and help make a contribution that will help somebody's son, somebody's father, somebody's husband return alive from this war. So let's dig into this. The news that's changing everything right now is what's going on with Russia's exports. India was the last reliable financial anchor for Russia, and that anchor has just snapped. It's due to the fact that these rising sanctions, they're not worth the cost. Major Indian refiners have announced that they are suspending Russian oil contracts. This suspension at the end of this year is going to stop Russia's ability to continue waging war, because it's going to stop Russia's ability to be able to do business. The risk of Western sanctions is being taken very seriously. They're too high to ignore. This decision, though, will put 50% of Russia's export volume to India at immediate risk. That's a sudden loss of 500,000 barrels per day. There's no replacement customer for this volume. China has already refused to pick up the slack. It wants to avoid American penalties. Russia is now trapped in a room with no exit. The getaway driver has quit, and the money is stuck in the bank. Today, the math of war has become a trap from which Moscow cannot escape. Urals crude oil is currently trading at about $55 per barrel. That is a disaster price for the Russian budget. That's down almost 20% compared to last year. The discount gap between Brent and Urals has widened to $19.40 per barrel. To break even the war budget, Russia needs oil prices to be much higher. But will they reach a break-even point? Well, most likely they will not, because every barrel now that they sell earns $15 less than what they had planned. They are running a gas station where they lose money on every gallon they pump. At this price, Russia loses $100 million every single day. That is not just a number on a spreadsheet. That represents 35% of their entire national income that comes from oil. It's simply up into thin air. And if the situation degrades to the worst case scenario, the damage becomes fatal. Models predict a revenue loss of up to $82 billion next year. That number is almost too big to visualize. But let's think about it this way. The entire Russian national budget is roughly $430 billion. A loss of this magnitude represents about 20% of the total national budget being wiped out. But it is even worse for the energy sector. It would erase 78% of all oil and gas revenue. That is 40% of the hard currency they need to buy microchips and missiles. They are bleeding cash, and the wound is getting deeper every hour. When energy earnings fall, the Russian budget becomes an unsolvable equation. The 2025 budget locks in $135 billion for national defense spending alone. When hidden military lines are included, total war spending pushes north of $150 billion. This approaches 7% of Russia's entire gross domestic product, a level of military burden not seen since the final years of the Soviet Union. Russia is now spending 40% of the total national budget on war and security combined. Maintaining this burn rate, however, with oil at $55 a barrel, is mathematically impossible. Consequently, we've seen that the National Welfare Fund has been drained of liquid reserves to cover this gap. Russia is essentially burning its furniture to keep the house warm for one more winter. And that's why today, while the price drops, Ukraine is destroying the credit card machine. Drone strikes have knocked out 38% of Russia's refining capacity. These are not just some random explosions, but a targeted financial attack, a systemic destruction and degradation of Russia's ability to produce more revenue. Sustained damage means 15% of all national capacity is permanently disabled throughout the end of this year. You can't sell gasoline if you cannot first refine it, and domestic gasoline shortages have hit 20%. The Kremlin has been forced to cap prices to prevent rioting, to prevent shortages across the entire country. Diesel exports have plummeted to their lowest level since 2020. A refinery offline for weeks means tens of millions of dollars in lost tax revenue, money that will never reach Moscow. But then, here is the kicker. They cannot fix the refineries because the control systems are Western technology. When a distillation tower burns down, today it is going to stay down because there is no opportunity to buy more from the West. Sanctions bite. To keep selling oil, Russia built its pirate fleet. It burns profit. Transport costs are rising at the exact same moment the oil prices are falling. It's the perfect economic storm coming together. What we're seeing today is a situation that mirrors the structural collapse that destroyed the Soviet Union in the 1980s. We've seen this movie before, and we know very well how it ends. In 1986, global oil prices crashed due to a shift in Saudi Arabia's production policy. The Soviet budget was addicted to petrodollars, just like Russia is today. Moscow tried to borrow money to fight a war in Afghanistan, and that war consumed less than 2% of GDP. Yet, that small cost, it bankrupted the superpower. Today, Vladimir Putin is spending nearly 7% of the GDP on a much larger war. History does not repeat itself, but it rhymes quite often. And right now, it's screaming. The Soviet Union didn't die on the battlefield. It died in the checkout line because it ran out of money. The mathematical parallels between 1986 and 2025 must be absolutely terrifying for the Kremlin, because they're pretty obvious. They're very easy to look up and to see. The modern Russian economy is actually in far worse, far more of a fragile situation than the Soviet Union ever was. The Soviet Union was self-sufficient. It had a system to produce its own machine tools. Modern Russia, by comparison, is a resource colony that imports 90% of its high-precision tools. Putin dismantled the domestic industries for 20 years. He was hoping to just sell more of the oil to the West and everything would be fine. But today, because they let all these industries die in Russia, that technology pipeline has been severed. Today, Russia has few options. Russia cannot rebuild its refineries because it does not make the control systems. It cannot modernize factories. It lacks all of the machinery it needs to have a modern economy. So imagine this. Russia started this war betting on the idea they would never be sanctioned, betting on the idea they'd win because everybody needed their oil. But today, when their oil is attacked, Russia has no plan. What faulty logic to enter a war and to have not considered this beforehand? A superpower that cannot make its own ball bearings is just a colony with nuclear missiles. And that's why today this is not an industrial giant that we're looking at. It is a gas station with a broken pump. So, how will Putin pay for this? How will he pay for this war if oil is not the option? Well, he steals from his own population in a process that is cannibalizing the country. The Kremlin has slashed subsidies to regional governments. They do that, of course, because they need the money on the front lines. And as a result, today, 12 regions are now fiscally insolvent and cannot meet basic wage obligations. Local budgets cannot sustain these payouts without cutting critical heat and power infrastructure. Fuel prices in key agriculture regions have risen by 40%. Imagine how that crushes the local population. How do they survive if their salaries are not keeping up given the high inflation that Russia is currently experiencing? Utility failures in regional towns are accelerating because maintenance, their budgets were all diverted. The choice is simple and brutal. You have to pay the soldiers or heat the cities. Moscow chose to have the soldiers on the front line, send more people to commit murder in Ukraine. They are essentially transferring wealth from the civilian population of Russia to the future military defeat of Russia in Ukraine. The military machine itself is degrading faster than it can be capitalized. The price of recruiting a single soldier has wiped out the entire regional budget development. The military itself is degrading faster than it can be capitalized. The price of recruiting a single soldier has wiped out entire regional development budgets. Sign-on bonuses now have skyrocketed. In many places, they're up to $20,000 to join the military. The state pays billions in compensation for the wounded and the dead. Meanwhile, the tax base is shrinking because fewer men are in the workforce. The labor shortage currently stands at 2.5 million unfilled positions in the country. So, with voluntary civilian enlistment, stalling prisoner recruitments is increasing. Russia will run out of money before it runs out of tanks. A collapsing unit is an expensive unit for the Russian budget. In fact, replacements must be recruited with financial bonuses that regions can no longer afford. Civil engineers are being diverted to build fortifications instead of repairing the grid. Civilian businesses cannot borrow money at the 25% interest rate which they currently face. This has led to a 20% increase in corporate bankruptcies. The war economy is eating the civilian economy alive. As war spreads into Russia's homeland, the economic drag will accelerate. Explosions in Kerch and strikes deep inside of Russian territory undermine the Kremlin's narrative. Every explosion in Kerch places pressure on Russia's supply lines. All of this will make it harder to get things to the south. Repairing these facilities will cost millions that the budget simply does not have. It forces Russia to disperse scarce air defense systems across vast zones. Every system protecting a bridge is one less system protecting a refinery, and the cost of defending the homeland is now competing directly with the cost of attacking Ukraine. At the same time, there's something else happening. U.S. sanctions are now targeting Russia's cyber criminals. It's going after their infrastructure, going after their shadow companies. Targets include entities in Russia and Serbia, Uzbekistan, and the UK. Cutting off these firms restricts the Kremlin's access to alternative revenue streams. These shadow networks allowed Moscow to bypass some of the formal economy for years, to bypass sanctions. But now, those will be tightened. The noose is tightening around the gray market cash flow that Putin needs to continue surviving. But now let's step back. Let's look at all this, and you'll see a bigger picture, and it becomes much more clear with altitude. Russia is projected to lose up to $82 billion in oil revenue next year, while spending $150 billion on the war. It covers a $48 billion deficit by draining savings and raising taxes. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drones are physically destroying the infrastructure that earns dollars. The machine is burning fuel faster than it can be refueled. Once liquid reserves are gone, the only option left is hyperinflation. The social contract in Russia is breaking under the weight of this war. Inflation is the tax you pay when your government lies to you. And that's why today, real food inflation is over 30% for the average family. Stores in Moscow now lock up butter in security cases to prevent it from being stolen. Hardly a sign of economic stability. Ordinary families are paying the direct price for the invasion of Ukraine. Healthcare systems are collapsing across the country. All of this is breaking the social contract. The conclusion is not dramatic, it is simply mathematical. Russia can keep fighting, but at a rising cost that it cannot fully replace. The war has become a budget pressure cooker. Falling oil income meets rising war spending. Shrinking reserves meets degraded infrastructure. A deteriorating army meets a labor crisis. Wars are fought with soldiers, but they are won with logistics and solvency. Russia is losing revenue and the capacity and internal cohesion simultaneously necessary to keep this war going. This is a structural decline, not just a temporary setback. Each month, Ukraine destroys more of the revenue that is needed to generate infrastructure to keep the country running. Each month, the budget gap grows wider. Each month, the Kremlin must choose between civilian stability and military continuation. And with every month, that choice narrows the future. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and consider becoming a channel member today. And please do leave your comments below. And please do check out the first pinned comment of how you too can contribute for Ukrainian soldiers to get life-saving drones. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.